Okay, this is long in coming. I need to do this before the entire series leaves my mind, but we're going to do a Should You Reads on the Hyperion Cantos, specifically the first 2 books, which are a complete arc. I don't feel like I have it fresh enough in my mind to talk about the entire 4-book series, and I don't know when I'm going to pick up the next arc of it, but needless to say, they are 2 distinct stories in the same world. They do relate to each other, but we're going to talk about the first 2, Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion, and whether or not you should pick it up. I'm going to start this video just talking about my experience with this series, my rating of it, and then we'll get more into breaking it down into writing style, character work, world building, plot, etc. So in general, I read this twice. I read it first time 6.5, 7 years ago, way back in my early sci-fi reading days. Someone recommended it for a local book club we were doing. And I'm like, all right, I'll read it. And so we read it, we talked about it, and then I continued and finished the entire series because I needed to know what would happen next. And I really enjoyed it. I think on my first read, back then I only rated books like 4 or 5 stars unless I hated it and then I gave it a 3-star. Like that was the type of rater I was. So I gave Hyperion 4 stars and everything else 5 stars. And on reread, it's more of like the first book is like barely a 4-star on my current like how I rate things. And then the second book is like a solid 4-star, but not like a 4.5 or 5 like it was originally. Okay? So enjoyable. I think it's worth your time if what I'm going to discuss in this video are things that will work for you. I don't necessarily think you have to read it. I don't think you have to read anything, but it's one of those books that's becoming a modern classic and a lot of people do point to it. And I do think it does interesting things in the sci-fi space, but I also think it does stuff that's not enjoyable for every reader, and I think that's okay, and we're going to talk about that. And I think the first part that's going to be the most divisive, controversial, or different from reader to reader is the writing style and the narrative frameworks of these 2 books. The writing style is dense. There is a huge vocabulary that is put on the page. I personally don't think it was useful, but I err on the side of communicating clarity that I do picking, like, weird words. Like, it's not even like I think he chose the right word. Like, I don't think the right word for a conifer tree is gymnosperm. Like, I just don't. Like, I don't think that's the right word to describe an evergreen. That's just, there are so many words to describe that type of tree, and gymnosperm is a word you learn in 7th grade, maybe, depending on your school system, and then you never think of again. You know, like, I don't know. That's the type of thing that I didn't love, and then sometimes, like, jargon is used to make you realize this is a sci-fi book, but it's not like used in a way that like me as a scientist even understood. So I don't know. I don't love the vocabulary. And on top of this dense writing, there is an emphasis on literature and poetry and being very philosophical and trying to dig into these themes. And that's just going to vary from person to person. There were times when I could easily read this book, and that was typically when we were in the dialogue or we were in the action of the plot. But when I was left with a character who was thinking about life and musing about what to do next, or we were thinking about John Keats, which happens a non-zero amount of times, like at least 10 to 15 times do we discuss John Keats and his life, which is odd to me. Like, I understand that Dan Simmons really appreciates and loves the work of John Keats, but it made this futuristic sci-fi book feel old to me. I don't really understand it, but representing something that is just so old and so distant from me in our current timeline, when my current timeline would be the past of this 100 years in the future sci-fi, it just didn't help me connect to it, if that makes sense. It's not like I wanted the book to reference literature from today. I just felt like it really dated the work for me. And I just don't like reading poetry that much when I'm reading a book. I like reading poetry when I want to read poetry. I don't really love it in my books. So that's like stuff with the writing style. I think the dialogue's pretty good. I think, like I said, when you're in the action of the story or we're setting the atmosphere or the set, like the scene of a room, it's really good. But when we're like having exposition or sometimes descriptions of the landscape, it's not that great for me and my taste. So if we align, keep that in mind. Another thing that will vary from person to person is the narrative framework he chooses for each of these books. The first book is 9 chapters over the course of 500 pages, and that's because each chapter is a short story, and it's going to be a different subgenre of sci-fi. It's each character telling a story. It's supposed to be basically inspired by the Canterbury Tales, which you may or may not have read in one of your English classes if you went to school in the United States, and depends on your school system and everything like that. And it's very much a book that I guess some people can read in isolation and really appreciate the framework and just seeing the journey of these individuals and how they intersect and where they're going on this pilgrimage. But also, if you care about the plot, if you care about the premise of the series, how it's told to you, and we'll get to plot in a bit, it's really just a lot of setup. It's a lot of intrigue and it's a lot of setup, and some stories work better than others, just by the nature of he's using different writing styles and different genres for each story. If you don't like cyberpunk, the cyberpunk story is not going to work well for you. If you don't like things written in letter form, the one by the priest isn't going to work for you. Like, consistently, there are stories that people love and stories that people hate. It varies from person to person which ones are the hate and love, but very few people love them all. Some people appreciate them all because it takes skill to do that. But if we're talking from an enjoyment perspective, the first book's going to have hits and misses, most likely for you as a reader, unless you really just like watching the exercise of someone doing this task, which, that's fair. So you have that, where you have this short story format for this first book, and then in the second book, you have like a weird narrative framework that I don't think's bad, but I don't think was necessary. And I say this as someone who loves convoluted narration, so, like, I'm being kind of a hypocrite here. Like, one of my favorite books recently, I think, does this worse. So, like, take this with a grain of salt. I just, like, was having issues and being jarred from the story with the narrative framework he's choosing and, like, trying to figure it out. But in general, it wasn't that jarring, and the second book is way more linear than the first book. Like, you actually just tell the story and see how it progresses. There are some time jumps, but it generally makes as much sense as Hyperion is going to make sense, okay? So that's the narrative framework. Let's discuss, the plot, because I feel like when you hear about it on BookTube, you're going to be prepared, right? You're listening to my video, you listen to other people's video, you know what you're going to get into. But if you read, like, the back of the book, I think if you read the first book of this series, you will be so disappointed, because it's basically saying there's this last pilgrimage to the strike. It's the end of the world. It's apocalyptic. What is the galaxy going to do? These pilgrims have to save the day, or they're a part of this. That's like the tension, okay? That's like how for Dune, they showed all the action scenes in the trailer, but like if you read Dune, you knew it wasn't going to be an action movie. That's basically the first Hyperion book. Like, it is so much intrigue and setup. And the stuff that's on the back of the book does not take place till the second book, okay? It becomes way more action-packed and way more fulfilling as someone who had questions and getting some answers and some resolutions. It's way more fulfilling in that way. I will say that if you are someone who likes to nitpick at plots, there are for sure probably some plot holes for you. I see plot holes every time I read it. I don't think it's a very tight plot. I can forgive it. I still have a fun time. My first time reading it, I saw nothing coming, and it was a blast. And my second time, I had forgotten everything, and I still saw nothing coming, even though things I remembered I couldn't see coming, because it's not really the type of book that leads you there. I wouldn't say it cheats, but it also doesn't let you as a reader really guess what's going to come next. Like, you maybe could. I don't know. Maybe some people are smarter than me. But I actually felt like some things were very inconsistent on a reread when I knew what was supposed to happen, if that makes sense. But if those things don't bother you, it's like a very exhilarating time getting to the end of both of these books, if that makes sense. It's not like the same as a Sanderland where it's just going, but I always felt pretty satisfied by the end of each of these books. Now, characters. This is probably why this series can't be an all-time favorite for me, because I feel like these characters, for me and my interaction with them, I'm not saying this is going to be universal, are more stand-ins for certain philosophizings of certain ideas and themes, and less people to me. They didn't feel really real to me, and sometimes if I wasn't given really strong narrative cues, I could interchange some of them. Like, it's just really hard for me to differentiate them. They're not really that compelling. I mean, two of the characters are basically just John Keats, and I really don't... Evie, don't be mad at me. I just don't love John Keats. Like, I don't hate him either. I don't know why I know so much about him now while reading a futuristic sci-fi book, if that makes sense. I don't know. I just don't think the characters are that amazing. At the same time, though, I think you will connect to one or a few of them. I do think their motivations make sense. They're just not the reason why I would ever recommend the Hyperion Cantos. Like, I would not recommend this series for character work. I think it varies greatly between characters. Like, I think there's one character who I think is done dirty in his character work. I think there's one character that is not consistent whatsoever throughout this series, and I'm just like, what? But in general, they're not egregious or anything like that. They're just not why I would recommend the series. But that said, I think if you really connect to the themes and the ideas that are being portrayed in these people's stories and journeys, you're going to connect to them in a different way than I did. And the last thing we'll talk about is the world building. You know, you're a sci-fi reader. Do you want to read the sci-fi world? I think it's pretty cool. I do think it's pretty cool. It basically will have almost every sci-fi trope you care about, partially because we're looking at all these subgenres, but intergalactic space travel, AI, like I said, there's cyberpunk vibes, there is like this social media thing, and for me, I know it's not the first time social media has been done in sci-fi, but for me, this is the first time I read it in a sci-fi book that was written before we had social media and internet and things like that. And I mean, their planets are also different and vibrant. I would say the world building is broad. It's diverse, it's broad, it's larger than life. It's not very deep. Like, you're not going to really understand the cultures of the places you're going to. You're not going to get a very good handle on most of the technology. A lot of it is window dressing. It's meant to facilitate these themes. And there are some really interesting themes in this series that I do appreciate. Colonization. What does it mean to stick to this form of government for so long? What does that mean to humanity? I enjoy this series. I think it's pretty fun. I personally, like I said, it won't ever be a favorite of all time. But if any of these things interest you and you're good with a dense writing style and like having hits or misses when you read the first story, I say try it out. But those are my thoughts. And if you do want like I haven't read it in 6-year thoughts on Endymion, it's a completely different vibe, completely different writing style from what I can remember, and I remember that being more about character connections and relationships. And if Hyperion is about the collapse of something, Endymion is about the building of something. So they just have very different spaces in my heart. And like, I like Hyperion because I kind of like watching stuff burn. Like, I kind of like watching this chaos. And like, there are larger than life characters in here. There's a character not really brought in till the second book that's like the leader of the galaxy, and she was wonderful to follow. So I recommend it. Not a favorite of all time, but I think if you go in with the right expectations, you will have a pleasurable reading experience. So if you made it this far, you want to leave an emoji, leave a spaceship or a planet, it's fine with me. Let me know what you think of this series, you know? Did you really connect to some of the characters? Because I know that's really different from person to person. What's something you really liked that I really didn't like? Do you agree with me? No spoilers, though, because I like to keep these very spoiler-free for people as, like, a resource or reference for should they pick up a series. And like if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.